George Bayruthi from FS Securities, a stockbroking firm on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And every Monday morning, I go through the market and see what happened the last 2 weeks. And we try, through technical analysis as well as fundamental analysis, to forecast what we may have the next couple of weeks. So please enjoy the presentation. And if you did, please give us some feedback and let us know how you felt about the presentation. So I'm going to start with what happened in the United States. Let's look at the US market. I've got here in the middle what happened over 1 week, that's last week, and then I combined the 2 weeks past today and try to compare the big picture versus what happened last week. So for instance, if you look at the Dow Jones, it had a negative week last week. However, when you combine the 2 weeks together, you know that last week was probably a small aberration, and over the last 2 weeks we were still up by nearly 0.75%. That is 196 points. If you look at the Nasdaq, we had a positive week last week and an extra positive week 2 weeks ago. Combined together 1.3% rise over 2 weeks, or 107 points. And that's probably related to what's happening between the US and China trade discussions. The 500 S&P 1.2% over the last 2 weeks. If you look at the US dollar, it's starting to weaken, 1.6% decline over the last 2 weeks. And on the other hand, of course, the Australian dollar versus the US took the negative opposite direction and went up by 1.3%. And the euro has been strong as well, and that's probably why the US index, that's the dollar index, was down. Sterling was actually almost steady. There is something wrong with that 99% here. We'll have to go and check it out. In terms of the commodities, over the last 2 weeks we've seen gold dropping by nearly $17. Most of it 2 weeks ago. Last week gold was very steady and finished at 1,493. As you can see here, very slight change in the price of gold. Silver also unchanged last week, 0.2% drop over 2 weeks. Crude oil, that's the West Texas crude oil, was up 1.3% rise over 2 weeks, despite the decline that we've seen last week of 2.2%. However, since last week we had a major drop in the price of oil, we might see that the trend may continue to be lower. And if you are interested to find out more about all the other commodities such as wheat, corn, soybeans, cocoa, sugar, all you have to do is call us and we'll tell you how you can actually trade those commodities. Now, looking at our market, you can see here the last 2 weeks, most of our sectors on the left hand side have been positive with the exception of gold. Gold has dropped 7.3% over the last 2 weeks, and so is resources. And obviously that will affect BHP, Rio and Fortescue. Our market, the ASX 200 gauge, is made up extensively by 2 major sectors, the financial and the materials. When both of these sectors are up together, usually the market responds accordingly. When those two are down together, the market again acts accordingly most of the time. Well, the financial over the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 good weeks, 1.7 last week and an extra 1% the week before, giving us 2.7% rise over the last 2 weeks. That's very positive for the banks. If you look at the materials, we've had a very bearish market, particularly because of the price of iron ore has dropped quite considerably the last couple of weeks. And obviously we're going to see that BHP again being affected by the material sectors. However, we've seen the mid cap. Where is the mid cap? The mid cap has had a good rise over the last 2 weeks, 1.2%. And so we've seen here the energy was up by 3.6%. Apart from that, we've seen the metal and mining in conjunction with the materials both down quite extensively. Industrial was up by 3% and consumer staples up by 2%, telecommunication up by 2.9%. So we move to the right hand side of this slide and we can see again BHP down nearly 3% last week. In combination of the week before, we have a total of a decline of 1.4%. Bramble down to 12% over the last 2 weeks. Newcrest Mines, gold mining company, down 6.6%. Rio was down 2.3% last week. However, it had a good week the week before. And in combining the 2 weeks together, we still had a 0.25% rise. However, that negative decline last week shows that the trend is very negative. And so is Newcrest Mines. All the other sectors, as you can see here, have been very, very positive. Worley, 6.5%. Telstra had a good rise over the last 2 weeks. As you can see here on the left-hand side, telecommunication was good. 2.9% rise, affecting the price of, or okay, I can say that Telstra, forming part of the sector, has actually pushed the sector up. Again, what we do that for is to give us a helicopter view about what's going on in the market over the last 2 weeks, and somehow we try to forecast what is likely to happen the next week or two. Look at volume. The last 2 days we've had the declines exceeding the advances, and we've seen that the volume have been relatively higher than the previous days. This is actually, you can see that the volume has actually been up the last 2 days in combining, when we can see that the declines have actually exceeded the advances. However, if you look at week on week, the last 10 weeks, we've seen that the advances in total have been higher than the declines. However, the fact that the last 2 days, in the last trading week, have been more declines than advances, it may show that on Monday the market may likely to continue to go down. We have a mechanical system that we have designed over the last 25 years. We're trying to fine-tune it, and the mechanical system looks at the various indicators on the chart and try to forecast what we're likely to see. Remember, the trend is your friend until the end, and of course we don't know when the trend is. We have to look beyond the charts, various trends, to see whether there is likely to see a reversal. You can see that the Dow Jones, after 3 weeks of declines for the aggressive and the very aggressive trader, we started to see a more bullish trend on the Dow. And the same thing appears for the Nasdaq and the S&P 500. Gold has been bearish for a number of weeks, as you can see here. So if you actually took my recommendation 3-4 weeks ago, you most likely would have made some money on gold, and so is on silver. Crude oil is at the moment going from bearish to more neutral. That means you probably want to sit down on the sideline. Wheat is very strong, and so is soybeans. Again, you may want to have a look at that. Coffee is bearish. Okay, now the Dow Jones charts, you can see that that's the daily on the right hand side. We've seen number of green candles indicating on a day by day. The close was higher than the open, with the exception of Friday. We've seen major decline in the trade on Friday, and that obviously will affect what happens today on the market on Monday. Week for week, you can see that last week the market went up very close to almost all-time high, but finished on the low end of the week, and that was again very bearish trend. But overall, when you look at the full picture, before Christmas last year, we've seen the market dropping quite extensively, recovering very strongly in February and March, then zigzagging, and then went to all-time high, almost to all-time high, down, up, down, and where we are today, we can see that the trend, you can see the stochastic is slightly bullish, the parabolic stop and reverse slightly bullish, the 21-week over the 9-week bullish, the candle, despite closing at the bottom of the week, still above the 21, that is still bullish. So I would suspect that even though we might see a decline the first couple of days in the week, we have still a strong trend, and provided what happens between China and the US, that may push the market up. Look at our market. Most of our sectors are up with the exception of gold and materials. Is it going to continue this week? Well, we're going to really see what happens to the price of iron ore, and I'm going to go through that in a minute, and that will affect the material and the price of gold. Apart from that, you may want to look at consumer discretionary, such as Harvey Norman. You can also may want to look at industrial and consumer staples, such as Woolworths, Wesfarmers. Telecommunication is slightly bullish for the very aggressive trader after seeing several weeks of bearish decline. Okay, this is actually our ASX 200 chart. The last 2 days have been negative after we've seen quite a number of days going upwards. Again, if you look at the weekly chart, it went as high as 6,737, and because of what happened on Thursday and Friday, the market ended up below the 50% range of that weekly chart candle. All right, so now looking at our mechanical system, again in terms of the trades, BHP, as we expected, bearish. Rio, again bearish. Fortescue is not showing here, but I would expect Fortescue would be also bearish. Crude oil, then we look at Santos. Santos has had 2 strong weeks of bullish, as you can see here. We've had bearish, bearish, and then 2 weeks ago started to be very bullish. And Woolworths, last week we had a good week. Macquarie Bank is very strongly bullish, and the banks, ANZ bullish, CBA bullish, Macquarie Bank bullish, NAB bullish, and Westpac bullish. So between all the banks, all the 4 or 5 banks, you can see Macquarie Bank and NAB are the 2 strongest banks to trade. Okay, now in terms of volume, we look for trades for companies that had extraordinary volume increase over last week. If you look at Santos, the weekly average of volume has been 26 million, but last week the volume for Santos was 31.8, 120% above the average volume, weekly average volume. So that can tell us more or less that there is a reason to look at Santos and decide what we're going to do with it this week. We might even go bullish on it. However, the trend is your friend until the end. We have to go into the chart and see where the resistance points are and whether there is a possibility there could be a reversal. And of course, we look at the price of oil and look at the price of commodities, look at energy sector, and decide what we're going to do. And if you want some advice, all you have to do is talk to us. Now, what happened on Friday? You can see that the Dow was down nearly 1%, and so the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. The FTSE in London was down, the DAX was down. The Nikkei in Japan was up, and China, the Shanghai, was down 1.4%. Gold was down $4 on Friday, or you can say Saturday morning. And West Texas crude oil was down 15 cents, $53.78, 0.3%. The American dollar, the Australian dollar versus the US, 0.5% on Friday to 68.6, very strong. The British pound, 0.7% higher, of course, of Brexit discussion, and the euro was stronger versus the US as well. So that can tell us that the US dollar was weaker. Bitcoin, for those of you who are really aggressive with Bitcoin, 8,219, that is trading $164 US higher on Saturday morning, and that converts to approximately 11,992 Australian dollars, up $193. We also like to look at the 2-year yield versus the US yield. And you can see that if the 10-year yield is higher than the 2-year yield, that is actually a prediction of a recession coming up. However, after we've seen the reversal a few weeks ago, now we see that the 10-year yield is well above the 2-year yield, which is a good sign. Now, to finish off our CFD trading, remember we entered the trade with $4,000 in total, and today we're sitting on 7,273, nearly 82% profit over 4 months. There is, today we've produced a PowerPoint presentation. It's on YouTube. All you have to do is go to YouTube and look at our channel and view every single trade we did on CFDs and how we managed to make 4,000 going up to 7,273. So go to YouTube and find our channel and go into our last trading. It's called Part 8 of our CFD tradings. Finally, I don't know your financial circumstances. Everything I said today is of general advice only. And before you take any action, make sure that you talk to us or talk to your professional advisor. Again, if you want to write to us, of course, you want to ask questions, write to me to george@fssecurities.com.au, or you can call me on my mobile. If you're ringing from overseas, it's 61 and then 411-259526. You don't need a 0. 61 is the country code. Locally, of course, you ring the full number. Happy trading and enjoy your week.